I thought I was going to lose you guys for a second. Cool. So I think we usually have a little bit more registration, but the holidays and everything, I'm sure people are just getting back. Also, I didn't do the greatest job advertising this one. I do apologize for that one just because of the holidays. But it is recorded and we'll have everybody, I'm sure we'll have people listening in after the fact. All right, welcome everybody that's coming online. We'll just give it a few more seconds to see the numbers rise. We're at about 50. Let's get it over 50. Yeah, we're over 50. Perfect. My introduction. All right, welcome everybody who's joining. I hope that everyone here has had a wonderful and happy new year, wherever you are. It is a pleasure to introduce you to our 5th webinar in this series. I really didn't expect us to make it past the 2nd one, so this is fantastic and I'm excited to keep it going. We have more and more people scheduled. So this webinar is entitled Exploring Career Opportunities in Ecology. We are so happy to have each and every one of you joining us. I am your host, Aaron Stoller. I currently serve in the industrial sector as an applied ecologist for ExxonMobil Biomedical Sciences. I do a lot of work in biodiversity and restoration. This isn't about me. Although I will say I also serve as the senior chair for ESA's public and private sector ecologist section and have served on ESA's membership committee. Quick shout out about the public and private sector ecologist section. We are planning for Baltimore ESA in 2025. If you don't know about ESA, you'll get to hear more about it from Sandra during our break halfway between. But we are planning for a mixer coming up. And we hope to see people there. It's a great chance for you to meet everyone in the biz, so to speak. And we also are planning some workshops for ESA's Career Central, where you might be able to get some insight into resume making and skill set preparation. All right, so enough of that. The purpose of this webinar right now, right here today, is to share stories and guidance from all job seekers in the world of ecology. More so than ever, there is an abundance of ecology careers available in all kinds of sectors, ranging from government, industry, consulting, education, and nonprofit organizations, as well as academia. Ecologists in these positions lead incredibly fulfilling careers that are helping to translate research into sustainable futures. These ecologists are also generating novel research in collaboration with partners across sectors and in academia. Unfortunately, and I speak from mentoring experience in academia, college and university mentors are not often prepared to guide students along a variety of these career paths. Hence, this webinar is here to help job seekers in finding career opportunities, to broaden your networks, perhaps to provide a bit of hope. I've heard that response a few times now, for those that are struggling to find their niche, and to help ESA cast a wider and more inclusive net over the professional ecological world. With me today, I have 2 guests, including Wayne Richter, who is a retired research scientist from the New York Department of Environmental Conservation. Said that correctly, yes?
Yeah, New York State.
New York State.
And New York City.
No, you got to differentiate those two. They're very sensitive about it. And Marney Pratt, who is a laboratory scientist and researcher from Smith College in Massachusetts. We're going to have a conversation with each of them in turn, and we'll leave plenty of time at the end for questions. If you do ask a question and need to leave before the end, no worries. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for your listening pleasure after its conclusion. Also, if you feel like asking a question in private, please stay tuned for all our contact information at the end. You should definitely connect with all of us on LinkedIn or on ResearchGate and send us all emails. Also, just a quick logistical note, this is a Zoom webinar, it's being recorded. There is a Q&A as well as a chat section on the bottom of your screen. If you have a question, please do so through the Q&A button. That will enable us to answer your questions. The chat is primarily for the moderators, so don't throw anything in the chat, answer it in the Q&A. If you raise your hand, I'm going to ignore you because I can't stop midstream. If you do have a question, again, please go through the Q&A and I'll remind you sometime halfway between. So we're going to start with Wayne. Instead of me fumbling over your introduction like I almost already did, can you please introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about what you did for your career, how you got into it, and anything else that you might think our audience might find interesting.
Sure, and thanks for having me with this. So I retired last year after nearly 40 years of working in mostly state and a little bit of local government, just to start at the end. And I finished a master's from the University of Iowa and then started looking for work and actually floundered around for a couple of years because didn't have a lot of resources back then. And then I kind of blundered into taking a civil service test for New York State government for the Department of Environmental Conservation as an ecologist, did well on the test, and about a year later got hired to work as a wetlands biologist in their New York City office. And I was the first division of Fish and Wildlife within the Department of Environmental Conservation in New York City. Worked there for about 2.5 years, and then I followed my wife to Miami, where she had gotten a postdoc. And I got a job, fortunately, with the Dade County Department of Environmental Resources Management, which was a really full-service environmental department. At that time, they had 2 or 3 dozen people who were kind of ecology types. And it was really remarkable how much they did for ecology. And my wife finished her postdoc, and she got a job at Skidmore College in upstate New York. I followed her there. And after about 10 weeks of taking care of our brand new baby, because back then they did not have family medical leave, I was fortunate enough to find an opening again with New York State Environmental Conservation, Fish and Wildlife in their Albany office now, the main office. And I was basically doing GIS development for a broad general purpose GIS application. I'd learned the GIS skills while I was working for Dade County. I did that for about a dozen years and then went over to the New York State Health Department as a research scientist in public water supply. Did that for 4 years and then came back to environmental conservation, fish and wildlife once again as a research scientist and worked on Hudson River PCBs, Superfund site. And then when my boss retired in 2010, I took on management of the state's fish contaminant monitoring program, where we analyze fish for a variety of contaminants and work with the health department to provide them the data to do fish consumption advisories. And then, as I mentioned, I retired last year. So that's my career path.
That is a circuitous path. You've involved yourself in in quite a lot of different things. Can you just say what that last thing was with the fish and yeah, just repeat that last one.
Fish contaminant, monitoring fish contaminants. So we analyzed about 1,500 fish a year for a variety of things like mercury, PCBs, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, pesticides, and some more exotic things like polychlorinated naphthalenes and dioxins.
Okay. And so was that for state regulatory purposes like TMDL work? I know most of our audience doesn't know that stuff. I'm just curious.
Not really for regulatory, more for, as I said, fish consumption advisories.
Okay.
Which are advisory, not regulatory. And then the other thing that fish monitoring, contaminant monitoring is really good for is fish are really good environmental integrators. I kind of can think of fish as this distributed network of sensors because anything that ends up in the environment that's at all mobile eventually ends up in the water and eventually then ends up in water bodies. And fish are bioaccumulators and biomagnifiers so that we can not only detect what's going on in the present, but use those data for trends. Is the environment getting cleaner? Are we actually solving some of these legacy problems like DDT and PCBs? Are they getting better? And do we have new problems like the per and polyfluoroalkyl substances like PFOS, PFAS?
Right. So, this is a unique opportunity for me to ask this question because you have been with a State Department agency for quite some time, and you seem like you have had the chance to influence quite a bit of where they have gone. I find that a lot of people thinking about state agencies kind of enter into it now thinking that everything is already established and it's difficult for the underling to get involved or to make any big changes. They're kind of just that new entry. What's your opinion on somebody entering into a state agency now versus when you started?
I would say actually things are more tightly managed. I think things are a little bit looser in terms of control and procedural regularity. Just having watched, been with environmental conservation, well, it started almost 40 years ago. So that's one thing. Their procedures have gotten more regularized, but it that doesn't mean that you don't have any influence on things. I mean, there's a way to there's really interest in doing the right thing and people listen.
Got it. So, I was just thinking through this, your career pathway has been somewhat circuitous. You said and you said that you followed your partner around, you got a few different jobs, you bounced around after graduating. There is a tendency amongst a lot of job seekers to think that a career is linear. My constant advice is that it's not, but I think that you can speak very much to that. Somebody who's just starting out, what is your recommendation for them if they're trying to find their dream job?
Yeah, I would say anything but linear and sort of pre-programmed. I mean, I I think I was fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time in a couple of cases, and a lot of it is being flexible, keeping your eyes open, and being willing to branch out and think about, okay, well, this isn't what I trained for in school, but I've got this skill set that I can use, and also develop your skills so that I I was able I was prepared for the last job I got with environmental conservation because I had gone, when I was at the health department, I started doing more statistical work based on actually graduate school skills and really up my statistics game, which really gave me the background to get that job. And similar, I mentioned having done geographic information systems for Dade County, and that really prepared me for the skill set that I needed to get my second job with environmental conservation. So it's it's important to develop new skills and look for where you can take new skills and see where you can move on with those and keep your eyes open.
Yeah, that's a really great point. One question that I often get from people is, well, should I learn GIS now, before I even start looking for jobs? And it sounds like you learned it on the job, which is great. But I wonder if that's still an option for people.
Yeah, well, I started doing that in the mid 80s, so it was pretty rare to have that in school. I find that most of the people coming into fish and wildlife who are out of school have at least some background with GIS and have some ability to use it. And it's probably often a useful skill. And I'm not talking about advanced user, but they've had a class in it or at least done some work with it.
Yeah.
And it's and having looked at a couple of your webinars beforehand, there are generally general transferable skills that you can learn that are not necessarily specific ecology, but they're very useful in a job setting. And GIS is definitely one of them.
And statistics, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
learning more and more statistics on the fly is really good. And I mean, I'll just throw this out there that a lot of state agencies, or even federal agencies, will, and consultants and industries, they fully support people in learning new skills if it's relevant to an upcoming job. And I find that you can be a little strategic about what you learn, especially if you're thinking about a career transition sometime in the future. Because, like you said, it was helpful to your next career to learn that skill.
Yeah, very much
Yeah.
so.
So I'm going to ask this question. I'm curious about it. So you said that you worked for New York City as well as New York State. Is
No,
that
no, no. I
correct?
worked in New York City for New York State.
Oh, you worked in New York City for New York City. Okay, then I'm not going to ask that question about working for a city administration than just a state admin. I was very curious about that. Do you have any insight as to what it's like working for maybe NY City administration versus the state?
The only thing I can say is I have occasionally worked with New York City people, and they're really talented. There's a New York City government has deep, deep expertise. And that was the same thing working for Dade County, which is county government in Miami. Lot of expertise there. I mean, local governments really can be a place of excellent colleagues, very knowledgeable colleagues, and a lot of expertise. Depending on the size of the government, of course, you may have more or fewer colleagues.
Yeah, I imagine that New York City has got quite a few scientists to help itself out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk just broadly about your career history, and maybe focusing on the last career that you've had with New York State. So, what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced during your transition between jobs and in your current job? And maybe if you can think of it, how did you overcome them?
So I think so challenges between jobs were, I mean, they really weren't. There were just openings, and I was keeping my eyes open and saw and got some jobs. So that was straightforward. I would say the biggest challenge that I faced in the last job was there's just so much that you can do and so much need, and choosing what to do and managing the resources well. And I was never very good at saying no to important things. Uh, and uh, so resources are a problem, can be a problem. State government goes through periodic periods of fiscal stringency. One of the things that I was able to do that helped was get federal grants. And I think that I got about $1 million worth of EPA grants over the last 10, 12 years. And maybe that's not a lot by academic standards, but for the state government, it's was quite helpful in being able to do things that we otherwise didn't have the resources for.
Yeah. Um, so, I try not to get into politics on these webinars, but it inevitably comes into my mind just thinking about, like you said, state governments will often go through periods of fiscal transition and whatnot. And I imagine that we're due for one of those very soon in a lot of areas. Um, what do you think for anyone who's trying to enter into government now, or in the next over the next year, what advice would you have for them?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, again, I'm without forecasting, because I don't have any, I don't think now is a particularly bad time to try to get in. So what I can say is different states, from what I've seen, have different ways of getting in. So like for New York State, most jobs, you have to take a civil service exam, and those exams are offered periodically. They're not offered all the time. So you need to uh, if you're interested in working, say, for environmental conservation, you need to get on the list to be hired, and to do that, you need to take a test. And so you need to look and go to civil service and find out when they're offering tests. And some states, I think they're more an evaluation and they're ongoing. But what I would say is, if you want to work for a state government and probably a local government, understand that they have pretty specified rules about how they hire. And there may be some sort of qualifying examination or qualifying process, and that process may not be open all the time. So just planning ahead there is probably a good idea.
So this is also a unique question that I can ask you. So the civil service exam, I'm sure that there's at least more than one a person listening in being like, well, what is that? And how do I prepare for it? And how do I know what's on it? Um, can you speak to what a civil service exam is?
Yeah, so New York State right now, what they're doing is something called professional career opportunity. I think they're offering it every other year, and it's a sort of a general aptitude kind of test. And and then you would put your qualifications for different kinds of titles, like a biologist or a marine biologist or an ecologist or wildlife or other kinds of things. And I believe there are study guides for these tests, and you have to pay a fee, and typically I think you need to show up. And I don't know if they do these online now. I haven't had to do one of these in a long time. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm not so
No,
up
do
on.
you know if they're also necessary for entry level positions?
But for the most part, these are for entry level positions, at
Okay.
least in New York State. Most above entry level positions are internal promotion only.
Okay.
And sometimes they'll be outside with a civil service test if they don't have enough people. But most starts in New York State government, at least in environmental conservation, are entry level.
Okay. So I will just offer a different state's perspective on this because I did work for the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection for a little bit, and I did not have to take a civil service exam to get the position that I was in, and I entered in as an experienced hire. However, I do know, as you said, for promotion within a civil service exam is required. I also know that for New Jersey, individuals are not required to take it for entry level positions, but I am aware that other states do require it. So if you're interested in one state or another, definitely Google it, right?
Yeah, I think the take home message is if there are state or states that you want to interested in, check out how they do it
Yeah, yeah.
and just learn and prepare for it to be different every place.
So for people that are interested in the lines of work that you did, can you just describe kind of like the ideal day in one of your positions, like a day that you kind of hoped for on a regular basis?
Well, an ideal day would actually have given me some time to work up data and just spend some time doing analysis and working with the data. And I have to say that those days didn't happen nearly enough. Uh, but I was sort of lower middle management by the end, and so fair bit of time was working with the people I supervised. I actually really enjoyed that. So interacting with people and discussing work that we're doing is definitely part of an ideal day.
Yeah. Did you get to go out in the field much?
I did not do much field work, and I think that's a consequence of where I was. It, so we had sort of technical and professional tracks, and if you want to, at least where I was, be a knowledge worker and that kind of thing, you're going to be indoors most of the time.
I'm sorry, did you say a knowledge worker?
Yeah, no, yeah. Basically, working data or
Okay.
doing, more professional level work. You're going to be inside most of the time rather than being outside collecting data or doing field work. I mean, there were exceptions, but mostly it was the closer to entry level you work, the more time you would be able to spend outside. But even a lot of our technicians and initial hire biologists, a lot of that's indoors now because
Yeah.
you're working with data or working with information and otherwise dealing with things that come up and not so much collecting raw data outside.
So, would you say that if you want to be working outside, that state or federal jobs are not necessarily the pathway for you?
I wouldn't say not necessarily the pathway, but you're probably most likely, from what I've seen, going to be in a lower paid job
Okay.
with less responsibility and less purview for making your own decisions and determining what you do. I mean, there's
That,
definitely
Yep.
exceptions, but I would say for the most part, it would be that way.
That resonates with a lot of the experience I've seen, and I've had. Oftentimes, when you start out, you're working more in the field, and then as you progress up towards management, you're working less and less. And for a lot of people, that's preferable. You know, you develop a family, and you want a more structured time where you're not constantly traveling to get to a field job or something. And it does pay more to be more management or more upper management, but it's something that transpires over the course of your career. Yes.
I mean that would be what I saw most people do over time.
Yeah. So I love asking this question. What was the most, what's the word I'm looking for? Proudest moment of your career? If you can look back at your career and the various positions that you've held, what is your proudest moment?
I think one of the things that really gratified me was actually being able to work with academics and publish peer-reviewed literature in the last stages of work, and that I'm really pleased to have been doing. Another thing is just having either interns or seasonal people fresh out of school, and watching them develop and then go on to get like a real job,
Yeah,
and feeling like I played a role in helping these people reach their potential. And then, another thing that I'm really pleased about was that I mentioned per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS, getting into that. When I started with the contaminant monitoring job, my thought was, well, we had a state-of-the-art program for the 1980s, because we were analyzing the same contaminants. And we knew that things like PFAS were out there. And then about 2017, they became a big deal. And we had done planning. And this was working with my boss and our laboratory. And we actually had a proposal ready to go for how we would start doing PFAS analysis in fish. And that went all the way up to the top of the department and got funded.
that's great. So, I mean, I'm going to interpret that for the audience and say you really had a chance to have a major influence on bringing the department up to speed,
Yeah,
which is fantastic. And I want to go back to your other proudest moment, which is working with academics and working with interns. And I want to point out how very academic-like that statement is. A lot of people assume that when they leave academia, they no longer can do those things that academics do, like mentor students or teach or publish. And it sounds like you did do that. I don't know about the teaching part. I don't know if you had a chance to adjunct anywhere.
no,
As a choice, some people do, some people
yeah,
don't. But to mentor students and as well as to publish, you did both of those.
yeah. No,
That's great.
I've had coworkers who adjunct professor, taught adjunct. So yeah, that's a possibility because again, working for state government, you develop deep disciplinary expertise of a practical nature, and that there are schools that value that.
Yeah. Um, those skills and expertise are really essential. And actually, a colleague of mine, we were just talking about proposing a workshop for the next Baltimore ESA meeting on technical as well as humanistic, aka soft skills necessary for careers in government and in industry, like project management and time writing, that a lot of people don't know. We're going to end here with this question to you, and then we'll go to Sandra talk with a few announcements where we talk to Marnie. Thinking about those technical and humanistic skills necessary for working in the government, what is your recommendation for somebody who's coming out of college to gain some of those skills that might be more attractive to an employer?
Yeah, practicing. If you're in graduate school or even an undergraduate, you can mentor younger, less far along students, and just having that skill set of, okay, I've worked with people, I've helped develop people, doing some kind of a project that shows that you can manage your own project and accomplish something, as opposed to having, book knowledge, let's say, or the ability to do what you're told. So having the soft, project management, running a project, designing it, making sure it gets done, and all the pieces fit together, that I would consider that under a soft skill. And being able to demonstrate that through a thesis project or a research project, I think that's really useful.
That's great. Thank you so much for giving that advice. That is also just so valuable, I think, for a lot of students. We do have some questions that I see in the Q&A box. I'm going to turn this over to Sandra for a brief intermission to talk about ESA, and then we'll go to Marnie. So thank you so much. And Wayne, if you can look at those questions and answer any of them, if you can do so. Otherwise, we'll send them out after the meeting and have you answer them there. Sandra, take it away.
The opportunity.
Yep.
Hey. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Wayne and Marnie. I'm Sandra Del Rio, Professional Programs Coordinator at the Ecological Society of America. Thanks for joining us today for the 5th session of Exploring Career Opportunities in Ecology. We're pleased to share that the next upcoming session dates are February 4th and March 4th, and all from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. You can register for them in ESA's webinars page, and I will be sharing the links in the chat very soon. I would also want to share the professional development opportunities that we currently have available through ESA that you can register for. We have 2 upcoming workshops that have to do with ecological restoration. We have one this month. It's called Deep Dive, the 10 steps of the ecological restoration process. And then in February, we have large landscape restoration in principle and practice. Additionally, I'd like to mention ESA's Professional Ecologist Certification Program. For those who might not know, ESA has a certification program. It's been around for over 40 years, and you do not have to be an ESA member to get certified. You can learn more about this program at esa.org/certification or emailing cert@esa.org with any questions. We'll also have an informational webinar very soon on January 21st, so feel free to join us there as well and ask any questions and just learn more about the program. And lastly, some important ESA announcements. The call for proposals is open for the ESA 2025 annual meeting in Baltimore, Maryland. This year's theme is Ecology is Everywhere, and we invite you to submit your proposals for a special session, workshop, short course, or Career Central sessions. And the deadline to submit proposals is in a couple of days, January 9th. And yeah, I'll be sharing all the links in just a moment. Thanks for your attention, and I'll hand it over back to Aaron.
Thanks, Sandra. I really appreciate that. I always like to throw a shout out in. ESA is a very approachable conference for anybody who has never been to an academic conference before. It's also very affordable for students if you happen to be in that category. I did actually, so certification was new to me as well, and I just got it. Thank you very much, Sandra. So I could have probably applied a long time ago, but didn't even know it was a thing until recently. And yeah, so I was proud to share that LinkedIn notice with my network. And it is a great place. ESA is a great place to network, to meet other people. I know that I'll be there. I know that a whole bunch of my colleagues will be there. And yeah. Again, for anyone that's chiming in, if you have a question for either of our panelists today, please do so in the Q&A box at the bottom. I see that we already have some questions. Thank you to those people that have been listening in and asking questions. Next up, we have Marney Pratt at Smith College. I'll let you introduce yourself in a second. I do want to say thank you so much for coming on. This is a unique one for our webinar because we've been doing a lot of non-academic stuff, but I really wanted to get a working professional in academic perspective on working in ecology, because a lot of people think that the only jobs in academia are tenure track professors. And it's a little daunting, and there's so many other rewarding professions in there. And I would love it if you could introduce yourself and speak to that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me. At first, I wasn't sure why anyone would want a more non-academic seeming series to have me here, but it's true that there are a lot of non-tenure track jobs out there. So first I'll start with my kind of career trajectory. So I started at a small liberal arts college in Maine, Bowdoin College, as an undergrad and majored in biology there. What I really appreciated about going to school there is that I got to know my mentor really well. So Amy Johnson was my mentor all throughout, really. I had her for a lot of classes, but also she really convinced me to do an honors project. It was really like, she was like, what are you doing for your honors project? And I was like, I'm not doing an honors project. And she's like, yes, you are. And I was like, okay. And that's really kind of what got me on the path of doing research, was having a mentor who really, you know, took me under her wing. And she's a marine biologist and does biomechanics. So I kind of started out doing more morphological kind of related projects, but they're always aquatic organisms, especially marine in those days. So I started out doing that as an undergrad, and then I went straight into a PhD at Duke University and did more research on aquatic organisms and marine systems. But it was during my PhD that I really realized that it was the teaching. Actually, as an undergrad, I really was like, oh, I want to be a professor, right? I want to go, I love teaching. I love learning. But as a PhD student, I realized like learning more about the like publish or perish sort of, you know, getting grants and having to publish a lot, that first of all, writing is not my favorite. So thinking about having to write a lot of papers and write grants and all of that just sounded really daunting to me. But I loved the teaching. And as a graduate student, I was a TA for a lot of classes. And I actually helped in the beginning stages of starting a teaching in biology certificate program at Duke when I was there in the biology department. So I participated in that as well as starting it out. And so I really became teaching focused pretty early on. And then after I finished my PhD, I went back to Bowdoin College as a teaching postdoc. So I got to do some teaching as well as some research as a postdoc. And then I did so I was 3 years as a postdoc there doing, so I got to teach like one class at a time kind of thing, which was nice not to have to teach lots of classes at a time and still be able to have time to do research. And then I did a 1-year visiting faculty position at University of New England. And then I came to Western Massachusetts. So when I came to Western Massachusetts, it was partly because my husband got a job. So similar to Wayne's story, right? That you're kind of the trailing spouse, the two-body problem, as it's sometimes called, right? Where trying to find two people jobs in the same place can be challenging. So my husband got a job at UMass Amherst, which is what brought us to Western Massachusetts. And I was also 8 months pregnant at that point. So I was like, I don't need a job right now. So I had my baby and figured out how to be a mom a little bit. And then I started kind of like adjuncting around and did a lot of, I did a visiting faculty position for, I think it was 3 semesters at Mount Holyoke College. And then I adjuncted at a lot of community colleges. And I really loved teaching community college. And so if you're out there thinking the research side isn't for you, community college can also be a wonderful place to land, in that as a faculty at a community college, it's really teaching focused. And also you get to work with such a wonderfully diverse range of students. And I really loved that. There wasn't the entitlement that you sometimes get at some more like elite places. And I really loved that population. Like I taught an environmental science class where the student was like, hadn't even heard of recycling, really. They were like, recycling? I've never even thought of doing that. I just felt like I was making a real difference in people who hadn't necessarily been exposed to everything that, you know, I was teaching. So that was really nice. And then eventually I landed the position I'm in now, which is a full-time position, non-tenure track, as a lab instructor. And so I've been at Smith for now, I'm in I think I've done 10.5 years at Smith.
So for
and
those people that don't necessarily know what non-tenure track means, can you just quickly, like in a sentence or two, define that for us?
Yeah, so tenure is a process where you kind of have this probationary period, usually like 6 or 7 years at the beginning, and then you go through the tenure process. And once you get tenure, it's very secure, right? So like it's pretty hard to get rid of you once you have tenure. You have to do like misconduct or the college closes or whatever. Like, so it's a great way of getting a very secure job. But getting tenure is hard, and it's you have to publish a lot and get grants and things like that in order to be eligible to get a tenure track job in the first place, you have to be pretty high level. And then you have to maintain a really rigorous, usually in most places, a rigorous research program, and get a like good big grant or something at least once in that probationary time to get tenure. My job as a non-tenure track job is doesn't include that. So I don't get that job security of once you have tenure, you're hard to get rid of. But my job started, I think the first year was kind of like, we'll see how it goes. And then it was a 3-year contract after that. And I went through like a review before the second 3-year contract. And then part way through my time at Smith, when I first started, it wasn't even considered a faculty position. It was a staff who teaches position. And but then we were able to advocate for being part of the faculty, because that's basically what we are. So we got added to the faculty, and then they're also added a promotion structure. So after I'd been here for 6 or 7 years, I forget exactly, it's kind of similar to the tenure process. But going through that review, once I went through it, I became a senior lab instructor, which has a 5-year contract. So it just gives and there's more responsibilities and a pay raise and things like that. So it's kind of similar but different. Like, so this year I'm going through another review process. So I'm a senior lab instructor. I have more responsibilities. I also have more privileges in some ways.
Yeah.
But I also have to still go through this review process every 5 years.
So it sounds like there's an equal amount of security, just a different way of obtaining it.
Sort of, yeah. I mean, my colleagues don't have to ever go through a review process again, really,
Right.
who are tenure track.
Well,
who are tenured.
so for the audience that might be unfamiliar with tenure track and why we do that, let me clarify something, because I did go through this process. And so the reality is that getting grants and writing papers is what a university or a college generally wants a professor to do, but they're also really difficult to do.
Yeah.
And so the university typically gives you this period of time called pre-tenure to prove that you can do it. And then once you prove you can do it, the university is like, okay, cool, you can stay. If you can't do it, then they're like, no, thank you. So, I mean, that's the reason why it exists. It has its ups and its downs, and you might have heard instances in which it's been abused. And it is a weird system to any outsider, but it does exist for a reason, not just to make it difficult to fire you.
Yeah, I think part of it too is I think tied to academic freedom. So that once you have tenure, you have the freedom to pursue different, maybe like riskier avenues for research that may not pan out as well, or things like that, so that you can take more risks and have academic freedom as part of the tenure thing.
So I interrupted you when you were talking about what you're currently doing at Smith. So what classes are you teaching? Who are you mentoring? And you mentioned that you're also doing research. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so teaching is my main responsibility. So teaching is my, main thing. And I teach usually 3 or 4 lab sections every semester. And the main thing that I teach is one of the intro bio classes. So the intro bio class, we have actually a series of intro classes in the core, and you have like the lecture and the lab for what I would say is like the big stuff. So like biodiversity, ecology, conservation is what we call it. And the little stuff, right? So it's like cells, molecules, and systems is our other one. So I teach the lab for the biodiversity, ecology, and conservation part of our core. And I teach that every semester, usually 3 or 4 sections. So I'm doing that a lot. That's my main thing that I'm doing. And I get to teach a few other labs here and there, but the main thing I'm teaching is this kind of introductory course, but we also are really trying to integrate research into our classes. So I use what some people call course-based undergraduate research experiences, or cures, to try and really involve students in research. So the main research that I've gotten involved in, even though my background is marine, I'm now doing freshwater, thus the river behind me. And I am helping monitor macroinvertebrates in the Mill River, which goes right through our campus, to help assess how we have an impoundment with a dam that we have to maintain, and it fills up with sediment. So we have to like manage the sediment and everything. And so we need to know how is this impacting the river? So I'm helping assess that by using macroinvertebrates.
I'm curious, and Wayne, if you pop back on, I'm curious, have you had the chance to interact with any state agencies in doing any of that work?
A little bit, yes. The facilities management funds this research, so I don't have to apply for grants. I just like send a budget over to facilities management within Smith College. And we do try to like host a symposium or something, usually once a year, where we invite people in from local and state government. We also, or other, interested parties. I also write like a report once a year, an annual report of like the state of things. So I've had some, the pandemic really, shifted things. So like we didn't have one for several years. And then I actually had COVID with the last, during one of the symposiums. So I had to like record my session and they played the recorded thing. So I didn't get to like interact with as many people during that one. And then the last one that we just had last year, not as many people came. So I didn't have a huge chance to interact, but I have had some chance to interact, especially with the state aquatic biologist in the past, not as much recently.
So I asked the question because I am aware from my time working with the state, I am aware that a lot of state agencies really value people in your types of positions because you have the time and some of the resources, aka students, cheap labor, to do some of the work under minimal budgets. And a lot of that work is difficult to get tenure track faculty to do because it's small change.
Yeah, especially monitoring. Yeah, monitoring work in particular can be hard. I think that I know a lot of faculty who have, whether they're tenure or non-tenure track, who have incorporated this kind of stuff into their teaching. And it is easier to do it in the context of teaching than trying to get grants and things like that, I think. So if you can find a project that students can introductory students who don't already have training can come in and help. So they help a lot more with the collection side of, helping me do the field work. But in terms of the like sorting and IDing the macroinvertebrates, that takes a lot of expertise. So that's not something that my intro students can do. That ends up falling to me mostly. And some students that I've trained like over summers and things like that to help me with. But a lot of that does fall to me. And I'm trying to figure out ways to like make it more sustainable because like when you're like, oh, you have the time, I don't really. So, but trying to find a way to kind of balance like, how can I keep this going? Because I think it's really valuable in a way that's sustainable.
So let's address that for just a second here. So time management in academia is often something that people do struggle with. A lot of people in your position are asked to do a lot, oftentimes more than there are hours in the day. How do you've been in this position for 10 years. How do you address time management? How do you stay sane and still have a family?
I think you asked, one of the questions you asked was like one of the biggest challenges, and that is one of the biggest challenges, I'd say, is working full time and raising children. I have 2 kids, especially when they're little, it's really hard. And that was very challenging. It's still challenging, but, and the pandemic was really challenging, but, yeah, it's something I still struggle with, but I think with kind of middle age, you start realizing like how to prioritize a little bit more, like what are the things that are important. Now, just my own brand of neurodivergence is like, I'm very detail oriented and everything is important all the time. So that is something I struggle against in general is like, again, like figuring out really what's important, not everything is equally important. And so that's something I've been working on more recently. And again, that's why I've been kind of reassessing like, okay, how have I been doing this monitoring project? Maybe I can get away with taking a fewer samples so I don't have to like sort through as many and, trying to figure out ways to kind of pull back and yet still get the most important.
So I guess I'm curious through trial, like, have you had any experience where it's taught you specifically time management? Have you taken any classes or read anything self-help, or has it just been trial and error, bouncing around and figuring out what works?
I think it's mostly trial and error, but Smith does offer a lot of like workshops and various things, and I certainly depend on colleagues that I wouldn't say I've taken like a class, right? But But I've gone to, I remember going to at least one session that I think it was associate provost or somebody put on that was like, how to say no,
Yeah.
you know, and I think it can be, what was interesting though, at that particular workshop, it was, I think like 99.9% women in that room. So there are certain people I think that find it harder to say no. And I think also in positions. So my position, because I get reviewed by my department and the associate provost like every 5 years, you also feel like, well, if they are going to keep rehiring me, I have to do all the things. I have to say yes. I have to be a team player. So there may be some people who are more vulnerable to that than others.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's just amusing myself thinking, oh, Wayne probably could have used that course. He said he had trouble, saying no to things. One thing I'll say to that is I don't know that it's some people that are necessarily more vulnerable to it. I think that there might be one or more demographics that are more receptive to the idea of saying no than others. I know from my personal experience, I just thought, oh, I'm supposed to say yes to everything, and that did overload me. Before we run out of time, I do have some questions I think our audience will really like. So first of all, you said, and I don't want to get into any personal details or anything, but when you said, you were pregnant and you were moving around and then you got back into it. I think a lot of people struggle with this idea of taking time off outside of working in ecology. How did you feel about getting back into it after taking that time off, especially with having a newborn and dealing with the requirements of being a parent?
Yeah.
Also, just a reminder for those of you that are asking questions in the chat, please do so in the Q&A. That would be helpful to us.
Just copy and paste it over.
Yeah, just copy and paste it over. That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think part of it was when I made a decision that I didn't want to pursue tenure track, that also took some pressure off of me, feeling like I had to keep at a really high level to maintain everything. So there was part of like, I feel like it didn't have as much pressure because I had already like mentally let that go. Like, I know that now at this point, I am not even competitive for that kind of job at this point. Although I know I could do it. I just am not competitive because I haven't published enough. Yeah, getting back into it, I wasn't out for a long time. So it wasn't, I was out for 10 years or something. It was like a year before I got back into teaching at least one class as an adjunct. I think adjuncting for someone who's really interested in teaching can be a great way to kind of get your foot in the door. Like I only had to afford a small amount of childcare while I was in the classroom, right?
Yeah.
And so having that like one class that I was adjuncting at the beginning was a good transition, I think, rather than working full time right away. But I did see a question or two that I happened to glance at in the Q&A about pay. Non-tenure track jobs generally do pay less, and adjuncting pays the least. So there are, some pluses and minuses to these things. But I chose to focus on teaching because that's what I love and wanted to do. And higher pay wasn't my main driving force. I'm fortunate enough that my husband is in a tenured position. He's actually the chair of his department now. So he makes probably more than twice as much as I do, even though I got my PhD before he did. So there are some definite like pay gaps that happen because of these choices. And it's not just gendered, because I have colleagues who are males who, are also in the same position that I'm in. But yeah, I think, taking a kind of a small step can be helpful. Even just finding those positions, I started just like emailing my CV to like chairs of departments of community colleges in the area or things like that, as like, hey, because I know they often like need an adjunct at the last minute, and to just have someone they can call, so like, hey, if you ever need someone, here are my skills, here's what I could do for you. And then once you get your foot in the door, then it builds from there. So I think kind of just being proactive of like, hey, I'm in the area, I'd like to teach just one class to start with, here's the kinds of things I could teach. And then eventually something came available and that got my foot back in the door.
Yeah, thank you for that summary. That's really great. And I think it gives a lot of a lot of good insight to people who might be facing a similar situation and want to have a family or want to take care of an ailing parent or for whatever reason that they might have for taking some time off. I think it's important to let people know it's okay. It's okay. Maybe try to keep your foot in the door somehow through like a single adjunct position, or maybe like 1 day a week intern somewhere, just something that you can put on your resume to say, yeah, I'm still interested. One thing I wanted to ask, there's a great question from Abigail on here. If you knew ahead of time that you wanted to teach, right? So instead of coming to that realization while you're a PhD candidate, if you knew ahead of time that you wanted to do that, what kinds of programs, either master's or PhD programs, would you look for thinking towards a non-tenure track at universities or colleges or a K-12 education track?
Yeah, I don't know as much about the K-12 world. I know there's a whole certification process that's different that I don't have a lot of personal experience with. But I think for me, I mean, I came to the realization that I love teaching pretty early, so I sought out opportunities and everywhere that I could. So like getting involved in a teaching and certificate program within my graduate program. But I think you probably need to first decide what level you want to teach at, because that really determines what degrees you need. So I also saw a question that someone asked, like, do you need a PhD? It depends. It always depends, right? That's what all ecologists answer for everything. It's like, it depends, right? Context matters. So if you're going to work in higher education, I would say a PhD is a huge plus. It's not always required. There are a couple lab instructors who have a master's and not a PhD. But in general, I would say within academia, if you're teaching at the higher ed level, you know, college or above, that you probably do want to have a PhD, most likely. If you're teaching K through 12, that's probably really different.
Yeah, so I'll fill in that just a little bit with some personal experience and knowledge. If you're looking for a job in K-12, a lot of times the schools will let you get a doctorate or a master's, whichever one you choose, or both, while you are teaching. They might not pay for it, but it's viewed as continuing education credits, which you're required to do in most states anyway as a K-12 educator. And so a lot of teachers choose to do that while they're teaching early on in their career. And if you want to do higher education, college, university, I have found that a lot of universities now have teacher clubs or teacher tracks that you can sort of be a part of and talk with your colleagues, talk with your other graduate students, fellow graduate students about teaching. And so I would definitely ask whether or not, if you're searching for a master's or a PhD program, I would definitely ask whether or not your university has one of those types of programs, even if it's not a formal program. Marney, we are almost out of time, and I am seeing the questions. I see that there's some questions that we haven't answered. I promise you I will send these out to both of our panelists today, and we'll send them out to all of the registered attendees. And we're also starting a blog where we'll put these answers up there. Thank you so much, Marney, for participating. And thank you to everybody who has attended. Sandra, if you could just flash up the contact information for us, right? So there is everybody. So most of these are LinkedIn profiles. Wayne's, I believe, is to a ResearchGate profile, but really just email us if you would like to get into touch with us. We're happy to mentor students whenever we can. I actually just had a phone call with someone this morning to just offering some candid advice. We do encourage you to reach out. Networking is almost 100% of the game nowadays. And so please do consider reaching out to us. Please do reach out to us, especially if you're going to be at the meeting. We would love to see you and interact with you. We do have some upcoming webinars, if you can flash to the next one. We do have 2 scheduled upcoming webinars with some nonprofits, another with academic. I'm so excited to have another person in academia come on. You may be the first, but not the last. And I will be scheduling more of these webinars well into the future. If you do know of anybody, and don't go to the next slide, Sandra, I'll just tell people to email me. If you do know of anybody that would be interested in being a panelist on one of these webinars, please just send me an email. My email's in the chat, or shoot me a message over LinkedIn. I would have a long list of people that are interested in this already, but I am very interested in gaining more, especially since we want to do 2 per month for the foreseeable future. So any help that you can get me in getting people to participate in this webinar would be great. I want to give one last thank you to both Wayne and Marney for participating in this. It is really helpful. I think that both of you have provided a very unique perspective to jobs in ecology. So thank you so much. And to everyone else, thank you for attending. Thank you for participating. Let your friends know, and I will catch you all later. Bye. Wayne, Marney, thank you so much.
Yeah.